All right, we're back in Genesis 26. Now, if you remember going back a little bit here, Genesis 25, we begin a new section of the book of Genesis. This is where now Abraham's story comes to a close. He is buried. He dies at the age of 175, and his Isaac and Ishmael bury him. Then we hear from Ishmael a little bit about his descendants, and I think you sent me a map on that. Ishmael's descendants. Let me see if I can pull. I think it was over here. Is this it?
Yeah,
Yes.
that's the one where the descendants live.
So here's a map of Ishmael's descendants. You can see that. Oh, this is good. It's got a modern drawings on it, so you can see where things are in real time. So Shur over here and Havilah over here. From Havilah into Shur. That's a long way. Holy cow.
There
So
was a lot of them.
yeah, well, I think they were more nomadic, weren't they? The Ishmaelites. They really they didn't necessarily have their own like singular homeland. They were sort of nomadic dwellers.
But that's what the story of Joseph sounds like, right? They were just cruising out there and they sold them to the Ishmaelites.
Yeah, they're kind of traveling. The Ishmaelites were traveling through to Egypt, and they were passing through, and they sell them that way. So yeah, so maybe this was sort of their journey. They were going through the Fertile Crescent kind of and just kind of going back and forth. So that's interesting. So that was 25 Ishmaelites, and then we had the scene with Jacob and Esau, and Rebecca gives birth to the twins, and we're told at that the word of the Lord comes to Rebecca. And what was the word of the Lord to Rebecca?
You have two nations in you.
Two nations.
Yeah. And which one will be the one that God has chosen?
The younger
one.
The younger one. So Jacob is the one, and that's the word of the Lord now to her. Jacob's the one. But what we find at the end of the chapter is that Isaac doesn't seem to get the memo here. He, for whatever reason, whether she didn't tell him or he ignores it, he favors Esau. And the reason he loves Esau, if you remember what it was,
he liked the food he brought home.
liked his food. It's that's the reason it's given. It's not that Esau's the older. It's not that Esau is hairy and stronger and he's a hunter and he's more manly. It's because he ate of his game. And so right there, you get a sense that, all right, something's wrong with Isaac. He seems to be a worldly man here, as is Esau, who then follows by selling his birthright for a bowl of soup. Again, this whole thing of eating is going to be a big theme here. And eating the immediate feast in front of them, and at the expense of the birthright of that which is truly valued. And that's the great evil, is that Esau is godless because he despises his birthright, the inheritance, that which is the true treasure. He despises it because it's no good to him right now, and he will exchange it for a bowl of red lentil stew. It must have been good. I can't think of anything that I would exchange for a bowl of red lentil stew, but such as it is. So we pick it up at 26 now, and this story is going to sound a little familiar. I'm going to make it larger, and of course, it's going to skip on me. So once that does that, yeah, there we go. Genesis 26. Let's start with Liz, if you wouldn't mind starting us off here. Verses 1 to 5.
Okay. Now there was a famine in the land beside the former famine that was in the days of Abraham. And Isaac went to Gerar, to Abimelech, king of the Philistines. And the Lord appeared to him and said, "Do not go down to Egypt. Dwell in the land of which I shall tell you. Sojourn in this land, and I will be with you, and will bless you. For to you and to your offspring I will give all these lands, and I will establish the oath that I swore to Abraham your father. I will multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven, and will give to your offspring all of these lands. And in your offspring all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws."
All right, so this is a very significant moment here. What is going on in this paragraph here? Why is this such a big deal? What's happening here?
Passing the covenant on to Isaac.
Yes, the Lord basically enters into covenant with Isaac now. And does it sound familiar to you?
It's the same one that he gave to Abraham.
Yeah, and what was it?
The promise, the land, and the great nations. Did I get that right?
So, okay, so he gives him the land, which I shall tell you. So it's basically the land. So don't go down to Egypt. It's a famine now.
Yeah.
There's a famine in the land. And remember, there was a famine back in Genesis 12, and Abraham went to Egypt during that time. But the Lord says to Isaac, don't go to Egypt. So he instead goes to Gerar, to the Philistines, which we'll get to in a second. Sojourn in this land, and then he says, the second thing he says to him in verse 3,
Blessing.
I will bless you, the blessing. And then the third thing,
Offspring,
the offspring, right?
nations.
Yeah, the descendants. So multiplied descendants. So all the things he promised to Abraham, he's now promising to Isaac. So you can see clearly we're paying close attention because we want to know, we live in a cursed world here. Where's the blessing of God? Where do we find this? And when we heard the story of Abraham, okay, it's something to do with Abraham. It's Abraham's God. He is the one that we can have connection with God through him, because God says, I will bless those who bless you. I will curse those who curse you. And so let's be about blessing Abraham. And now that Abraham's gone, the question is, well, who next? Who is the one? And it was very clear in the last chapter that Abraham makes it clear that Isaac is his only son. He has many children from concubines like Keturah and Hagar. And he blesses them, gives gifts to them, but Isaac is the one, the only true heir. And now God confirms that with the covenant with Isaac. And he says at the end, why will he give Isaac all these things?
Because Abraham obeyed my voice, he says.
Yeah, so
There's a benefit downrange with following what God says, I guess.
yeah, there's this tight connection between fathers and sons. We've mentioned this before. There's a oneness between fathers and sons, so that when one receives this blessing, the second one goes along with it. That's why, remember when Noah, if you remember, when Ham did something so wicked against his father, Noah did not curse Ham, he could have cursed Canaan. And he said, it doesn't seem fair, but the point is that Noah and Ham, there's a oneness, they're father and son. If Noah curses Ham, he curses himself. And so the curse goes to Canaan, Ham's son, and that way it doesn't come back on Noah in that regard. There's that distinction. Here we see it again. Isaac is receiving these blessings because Abraham obeyed and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. What were the laws and the statutes and the commandments that God gave to Abraham?
Well, he didn't have the moral law yet. That had yet to come, but there are laws written on his heart.
Yeah, they
Natural.
were. Yeah, what were the commandments that God gave to Abraham?
Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou
Well,
shalt not.
those are the laws he gave through Moses to the people of Israel, but he didn't specifically say those to Abraham. What were the commands he gave to Abraham?
Oh, he told him not to go back to Haran, for example.
Yeah, you're going to see that they weren't the kind of laws like legal codes that you see in legal books. They were commands of go here, do this, don't go there. So he'll tell Abraham at the very beginning, he gives him a command: leave your country, leave your home, and go to the land I'm going to show you. And Abraham goes. He then tells him later on, if you remember, take your son, your only son, whom you love, to Mount Moriah and offer him as a sacrifice to me. And Abraham does. And so this obedience of Abraham there's never a time when the Lord speaks to Abraham and commands him that Abraham says no. He's not a perfect man by any means, but every time the Lord speaks to Abraham, Abraham obeys. He receives those orders and follows them.
Wasn't the covenant of circumcision also with Abraham?
Yes, that was another part too. He tells him to circumcise his children, even himself, and that's a pretty heavy lift for a 100-year-old man to circumcise himself.
Mm.
That's quite a thing to ask, and he does that. You're absolutely right. And so every time, so we have some of the commands we've had, for example, to leave his home and live in a strange land, in tents, to sacrifice his son, to circumcise his household. Those are some of them. I mean, but every point Abraham obeys. That's what faith looks like. It's obedience. It's a heart submission to God. So all this is grace given to him, the land, the blessings, the descendants. That's all the grace of God, but it's received through faith. Abraham is a man of faith. He's not perfect by any means, but he is obedient. He does submit to the Lord. And for that reason, Isaac shares in this. And now we get to another story. So now they go to Gerar. Let's see what Gerar is. So Isaac goes to the Philistines. And they always call in the middle of our thing here.
No,
Anyone's
that was
Gerar there?
earlier in 25.
What's
Yeah.
that?
That was from 25, 10, and 11. That was earlier.
Okay.
No, I don't think it's in that map.
Yeah, but there's Philistia. So he goes, instead of going out to Egypt, he stops in Philistia. He goes there. Okay. All right. The Philistines. Let's take a look at what happens. He settles in Gerar.
Oop.
Here we go again.
Hmm.
I have no idea why it keeps doing that, but it does. So let's pick it up from there. Elizabeth, would you read that for us? 6 to 11.
So Isaac settled in Gerar. When the men of the place asked him about his wife, he said, "She is my sister." For he feared to say my wife, thinking, lest the men of the place should kill me because of Rebekah, because she was attractive in appearance. When he had been there a long time, Amalek, king of the Philistines, looked out of a window and saw Isaac laughing with Rebekah, his wife. So Amalek called Isaac and said, "Behold, she is your wife. How then could you say she is my sister?" Isaac said to him, "Because I thought, lest I die because of her." Abimelech said, "What is this you have done to us? One of the people might easily have lain with your wife, and you would have brought guilt upon us." So Abimelech warned all the people, saying, "Whoever touches this man or his wife shall surely be put to death."
All right, let's try to get a timing on this here. So we have the former is not everything's in order here. So I don't know exactly when, but we just had the birth of Jacob and Esau, and then we have them as, I guess they're adults at this point, or at least they're young men, when Esau sells his birthright for a bowl of soup. So if you remember, how old was Isaac when Esau and Jacob were born? Anyone know?
40?
Close. He was 40 when he got married. That is correct. He was 40 when he got married. Anyone know how old he was when they actually were born, though?
It was 60, wasn't it? 20 years later?
20 years later. So he's 60. By this time, you could probably say he's probably about 75 years old when this event happens. And so he goes there with Rebecca, who is probably, I'm going to guess, let's see, she was married and then she was 20 years barren and then 15 years from then. So she's probably 50, maybe, I'm thinking. At least 50. So Isaac, I'm gonna take some guesses here. Probably 75. And Rebecca, about 50 or so, I'm gonna guess. Because she would have, if she was a virgin when they got married, she was probably somewhere between 15 and 20 years old or so. She's a young woman. And Isaac was, let's say, 40, so that could be about that. So what this again, this sounds familiar, doesn't it? What happens?
She's my sister.
They settle in Gerar, right? And Isaac says, she's my sister. Why does he say that?
Like
That's
father.
what his father taught him to say.
Say it again, Bob.
That's what his father taught him to say.
It's we learned, and you know what? It works. Unless the only time it doesn't work is if a king decides to take control of your wife. We talked about that before. It was a practice that Abraham did everywhere. Every time he went to a new place, the people are wicked, and they have a moral code about them that's perverse, and they're not polite. And so if they see, and what makes her attractive, she's a middle-aged woman. What makes her really truly attractive in appearance? I'm sure she's a very noble-looking, attractive-looking middle-aged woman.
She has money.
Money.
Yes, it's not. That's right. If you're looking for a wife, you're not looking for someone who's in her 50s, 60s, and you want to raise a family. You're looking for someone young and beautiful. What makes her attractive is the wealth. Isaac and Abraham are wealthy, and they're living in strange lands. They have no protectors there. And so Isaac comes in there and says, here's the plan, just like it worked for my dad, and it did. We'll say you're my sister, because that way, if you remember how it goes, you know why how that helps him?
Because
Well,
if she was his sister, they wouldn't kill him to get to her.
If they want, yeah, if they're married,
They
then
want
if he dies, and they can kill him any way they want to, there's no one going to care. Someone can take her as their wife and then would receive all that wealth would be theirs.
But I thought that in those times, the money didn't go to the women. It went to the oldest son.
It would, yes. Well, I'm not sure exactly, to be
Well, she
honest.
didn't have any children at that time, but
She did. She may have had children. So we're not sure if this is happening time-wise. According to the narrative, it's happening after she has 2 kids.
right.
But they're probably not of age to receive it. So someone could take her and take the possessions. The other side, if you're my sister, then there's no point in killing him, and there's no point in taking her, because you won't get anything for it. There's nothing that would come with it if she's just a sister. And not only that, but you would have to ask permission of Isaac to have her hand, and of course he would say no. So again, it worked for Abraham everywhere he went, except with Pharaoh and with King Abimelech, who happens to be the one where Isaac is. So Abimelech seems to be familiar with this game, because if you remember, that was the last time with Abraham where Abraham said that, and Abimelech took Sarah as his wife, and then all kinds of trouble came upon his house because of it. All right, so she's my sister, but the point really is not about whether Isaac was right in doing this or not. That's not the point of the story. It does say something about who Isaac is and the Lord's relationship to him as well. And this again is a test, just like we saw with Abraham. God made the promises, the land the blessing, and the children, you remember, right? And then immediately he puts it to the test. He brings a famine comes upon the land, and Abraham loses the land. He has to flee to Egypt. He's out of the land. And then the famine is a curse. There's a curse, it seems. The blessing seems to be gone. And then Sarah is taken from him. And so all of the things that God has promised him are threatened. And then God intervenes and gives it all back in even more than he took away. Same thing here. There's this famine. They have to leave the land, but not to go to Egypt, only to Philistia. And while he's there, he feels the same danger, says she's my sister. And you're thinking it might happen the same way again. We might have another incident where the wife is taken. But let's just see what happens. When he was there a long time. Now notice it doesn't happen right away. It's after a long time. I don't know how long a long time is. This could be years. What happens?
Abimelech looks out the window and sees them laughing and realizes that they're husband and wife.
Yes. And the word laughing there is I think that's more of a euphemism for being intimate, shall we say, with each other.
King James Version says sporting, but then it has a note that says caressing.
Caressing, yes. It's not the way that a brother and sister would behave, put it that way. So Abimelech sees them. He looks out his window, which says something to you as well, that Abimelech the king can look out his window and see them. What does that imply?
You're staying with him.
Yeah, they're dwelling near the king. I mean, so they're of respected position there. Abimelech looks out and sees Isaac and Rebecca, we'll say, messing around here or laughing. We'll put in quotes, laughing. Why did he use the word laughing? Again, where's that significance of that word?
His name.
That's what Isaac's name means, if you remember, right? And what happens next?
Abimelech challenges them. What are you doing?
Yeah. Abimelech calls him out on this. How could you do this? Because what is Abimelech concerned about?
Someone else will.
Being punished by God.
Yeah, this is really interesting. He is afraid that someone would take his wife. And if someone took his wife, what would happen?
To be punished.
God would show his wrath on him.
Yeah. And then we would bear guilt before God. Why would he say that? Again, this is not how kings talk. Most kings would not care if someone took Isaac's wife. And no king would care, except this king does. It doesn't matter what happens to a sojourner in there with his wife. Why would you say that? And let someone take your wife, and that would be a terrible thing. But he goes further and says, this is really important. He says, if someone had taken your wife, you would have brought guilt upon us, on all of us.
Didn't he go through this with Abraham?
Yes, that's why. Yes, exactly right. He remember, God is the one who spoke to Abimelech and said, you're a dead man.
Right.
You remember in that dream. So Abimelech, the point is that Abimelech in this story confirms the covenant with that the Lord has with with Isaac. He knows He understood by his own experience the covenant that God made with Abraham, that if you do anything to threaten or harm this family, you will be cursed by God himself. I will curse those who curse you. And Abimelech has become, in a sense, a believer in that regard. He believes in the Lord. And now when Isaac comes and he sees him doing this, it's clear that Abimelech believes that Isaac is the chosen one, that the covenant now applies to Isaac too. Otherwise, a king doesn't talk like this. The king's the most powerful man in the world. He does what he pleases. And if anybody had done anything, he would have said, well, maybe there was a rule against it, and he just would have punished the guy who did it. But Abimelech is terrified that if we do anything to harm this family, guilt will come upon us. He gets it. So the nations are confirming the covenant. So we have Abraham really setting it up. So it's Isaac, the Lord himself appears to him. And now in this first example here, Abimelech testifies to the covenant that God has made with Isaac. So Abimelech then warns all the people. And what does he say?
You die if you touch this woman.
If you touch this man or his wife, you will be put to death. And what does he mean by touch? Not allowed to shake their hands?
Intimately.
Yeah, to harm in any way. You do anything to harm them, you will be put to death. They are especially protected. That's unheard of. That a sojourner would come into this country and the king himself would warn every one of his citizens, do no harm to them in any way, or you will die.
Interesting how Abimelech is the same and the same guy in chapter 20 as in this chapter 26.
Yeah. I think it's the same guy, yeah.
I mean, I assume it's the same guy. They call him Abimelech.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, maybe it's his son, but I'm gonna guess it's the same guy. It is let's see if it's many years later. That's a good question. So when it happened before with Sarah, that was before, I think that was before Isaac was born, right?
Yeah. Yes.
So it might be a different Abimelech then. It might be his son. So
They're both ruling Gerar, says chapter 20 in this one. So
yeah. So it could be, because that would be a long time difference. You're looking at least, unless it's going back in time, but even if it does, you're going back at least 60 years or so between this incident and the last time it happens.
You know,
So
I'm just looking at the note in here, and it says Abimelech, this is from chapter 20, with Abraham. And it says the king who took Sarah into his harem was most likely the father or grandfather of the Abimelech encountered by Isaac.
oh,
Yeah.
cool. Thank you.
I'm gonna guess that too. Yeah. And so even so, you can notice that what's happening with Abraham and Isaac is not is not in secret. It's public. People are aware. They're seeing these things. They're watching, and news is spreading. God is making his name known to
So
these.
in some ways, like you mentioned, that he was kind of like a believer. He had some faith in God, and it was passed down.
Yeah. And for Isaac to dwell there for so many years, for a long time, again, we don't know how many years that would be, but a long time. He could have been there for quite some time.
Mhm.
All right, so let's take a look at the next section here, 12 to 16. Bob Fowler, you want to read that for us?
And Isaac sowed in the land and reaped in the same year 100-fold. The Lord blessed him, and the man became rich and gained more and more until he became very wealthy. He had possessions of flocks and herds and many servants, so that the Philistines envied him. Now the Philistines had stopped and filled with earth all the wells that his father's servants had dug in the days of Abraham his father. And Abimelech said to Isaac, "Go away from us, for you are much mightier than we."
All right. So what's the point of this story here? By the way, does this sound familiar to you? Where they become so wealthy, they have to sort of part ways here.
Abraham and Lot.
Abraham and Lot. A lot of these stories are kind of recycling here, but what's the point of that paragraph? What does it tell us?
That he's continually blessed.
Yeah, the Lord is keeping his promises. The Lord blessed Isaac. And did he bless him? My goodness, he blessed him. 100-fold. That's a lot. If you get, I think like 5-fold is like considered like a bumper crop kind of a thing. This is a phenomenal blessing of God. It's supernatural even when you think about it. Becomes very rich. And what's the problem with when someone is blessed like this?
There's not enough room.
Not enough room, and there's one other issue that's mentioned here.
People get jealous, they envy you.
Yes, the Philistines envied him. By the way, this is a common theme where you have the Christ, the chosen one of God, being envied by others. Can you think of other examples in the Bible of God's chosen one being envied?
Well, the Pharisees were jealous of Christ, and not much bigger than that.
Yeah, and that's exactly what Pilate says. He could see that he knew that Christ was innocent and that they were doing this out of envy. That's what Pilate even reflects upon. And even before that, in the Old Testament, what's the first story of brothers?
No, Cain and Abel.
Cain and Abel, yeah.
Cain and Abel, right? There's envy there. Later on, we'll see Joseph and his brothers with envy, and the fury that will lead to his being betrayed. Daniel will be subject to envy later on. Throughout this, you see God blessing one, but along with that blessing comes this hatred from the world, this envy. It's even today. It's like, why? What motivates in the conflict in the Middle East right now between the Palestinians and the Jews? What is motivating Hamas and these Palestinians to want to wipe out the Jews? What drives them to this?
Jealousy.
Yeah.
Envy.
It's bitter envy. It's what James says is the demonic wisdom. He says the wisdom of demons is this: it's selfish ambition and bitter envy. Be aware of that. That's what drives the fiercest evil in the world is a bitterness and an envy over those whom God is blessing. I often use this example all the time. As a Red Sox fan, I've always been taught and always hate the Yankees. Well, at least until the year 2004. And what was the reason I hated the Yankees? Were they just terrible people? Were they horrible?
No.
It's like, what do they say? They hate us because they ain't us, right? We hate them because they win all the time. They win all the championships every year. It's always the Yankees. We hate them so much
We still
because
hate
of that. Even though the Yankees, man, if you want to talk about quality characters, the Red Sox had some terrible guys in their team, and the Yankees actually had some really great guys. One of my favorites, Mariano Rivera, he was a devout Christian, and one of just the greatest characters and guys. But I hated him because he was a Yankee and he won all the time. That's it. That's the only reason. Likewise here, it's like Isaac now is feeling the heat from the Philistines, and what do? Out of their envy,
Fill up the wells.
yeah, stopped up the wells. I mean, that, by the way, is a terrible thing to do. Why is that such a bad thing?
You need water to survive. In the desert especially.
Yeah. So Abraham had dug all these wells
Hi, right?
all around. You know how much effort it takes to dig a well in that day? You know, that's an enormous amount of effort for these guys to do that. And they're cherished. You get a good well. People will fight battles over wells in the desert because water is so scarce. And just go around filling them in. I mean, what's the purpose? Just think about filling them in. The only purpose of that is to stop you from drinking anything. There's no benefit to anything for doing that. It's not like they needed them. It's not like having the wells there harmed them in any way. It was just to frustrate them and to cause them harm. And so Abimelech basically says it's time to go. But notice his reasoning for why it's time for Isaac to go.
You're mightier than we are.
Yes. He acknowledges again, you are much mightier than we. This is the blessing of God, unheard of, that a sojourner who doesn't own any land comes in there and everything he touches turns to gold. So he becomes so powerful that even the king says you need to get out of here because you're too much for us. It's just too much. So
Now, was he envious as well, or was he still looking to protect at this point?
it seems to suggest that Abimelech is not envious of him, but concerned for his country and for the trouble. He sees the tension and trouble it's causing because Abimelech is after his experiences, he knows that it's good to have Isaac as friends with him and that you experience the blessing with him. Again, if you think about it, if you reap 100-fold, that means weather's been pretty good. And if the weather's good for Isaac, it's good for all of them. Now, they may not get 100-fold out of it, but I'm sure they get to share in his blessings with that. But the question is, but the envy is such that you're not content with blessings if someone else is getting blessed more. Right? So there's a horrible story of it's a made up story, but it's an interesting one about a guy who is very envious of his neighbor, just jealous. Everything he does, the guy has a bigger house and better car and a more beautiful wife and better behaved kids and everything, and he just looks in his own life and he's very discontent. He's very envious of his neighbor, and one day he comes across a lamp and he rubs the lamp and out comes a genie. And the genie says to him, I will give you anything you want, but whatever you ask for, your neighbor will get twice as much. Okay? And so what does the man ask for?
Not much.
He says, I want to be blind in one eye. Okay? That's what envy does. You're so consumed, you're never content, and you're just determined to you don't care about your blessings don't mean anything to you because he's getting more. You just are in this competition with them, and your only joy is to see them suffer. It's a wicked place to be. It's the devil's brew. It really is. So, any case, so Abimelech says it's time to go. You're much mightier than we are. And Isaac leaves. Let's pick it up there. Let me start a new page so we can read it all together. And
I just real quick, I just remember that, and it stuck in my brain, the time you laid the difference out between jealousy and envy. And that was very helpful. You're envy for somebody else's stuff.
Yeah.
You're jealous for what you own. You're jealous for your wife. You're envious over someone else's wife, that kind of stuff.
Exactly.
That was helpful.
That's why God is jealous, but he's never envious.
Right.
Jealous is a possessiveness. It's for what you're passionate about, what you have. Envy is, you're longing for what you don't have.
Mm.
All right, let's pick it up there. One of the girls here, would you like to read for us here? Yeah, Addie, you want to do it? All right, we got some big words here. Can you handle it?
Yes, is
All
it?
right, 17 down to 22.
So Isaac departed from there and and cape
Camped.
encamped in the valley of Ger Gerar and settled there. And Isaac dug again the wells of water that had been dug in the days of Abraham, his father, which the Philistines had stopped after the death of Abraham, and he gave them the names that his father had given them.
I'll do it already.
But when Isaac's servant dug in the valley and found there a well of springs of water, the herdsmen of Gerar quarreled with Isaac, herdsmen, saying, "The water is ours." So he called the name of the well Esk, because
Mhm.
they counted, wait,
You got it, Con.
contended with him. Then they dug another well, and they quarreled over that also. So he called its name Sidnah, and he moved from there and dug another well, and they did not quarrel over it. So he called its name Rehoboth. Rehoboth, saying, "For now the Lord has made room for us, and we shall be fruitful in the Lord."
Okay.
And
Good job, Addie. I gave you a very tough passage there, so very nice job.
You did a
All
good job, Betty. That was a hard
you.
one.
Yeah. So Isaac encamped now in the valley of Gerar. All right. So it's still in that same vicinity. I think it's still Gerar is still part of the Philistine area, but he moves away. I think getting away from the others and what does he do when he gets there?
He redigs the wells.
All right. So Isaac he redigs the wells that Abraham had dug, which were stopped up, that were stopped up. All right, and he gives them names, as the same as his father. But then we have a few here that are set apart. So he dug in the well, and the herdsmen now of Gerar quarreled with Isaac's herdsmen. All right, let's talk about that. So what does that mean? What's happening there in verse 20?
They're bickering over whose well it is.
Yeah, they say this is our well. And what does Isaac do?
He names it.
So Isaac names the well Esek, which means
Contention.
Tension.
contention. Okay. And the sense is that it seems like he just gives them the well.
He left it to
Like
the out of
another well.
contention.
Yeah. So they dig another well. And they call that well, and they quarrel over that one too. And what he calls it what?
Sitna,
Called now Sitna, which means
hatred.
Enemy, opponent.
enmity. Is it? Enmity.
Yeah.
Enmity,
adversary.
hatred. All right. So do you want to drink from the well of contention? From the well of enmity and hatred? Is that what you want to drink from? I don't.
No.
So what does he do?
Digs another well.
Moves and digs another well.
He is
And
persistent.
this one they don't quarrel over. So what does he call it?
Rehoboth,
It means
enlargement.
enlargement.
I'm getting notes from my Bible, everybody. I'm not that smart.
Well, you're doing pretty good there, Liz.
Good.
A smart cookie.
And notice his conclusion, because the Lord has made room for us, and we shall be fruitful. Look at, so being the chosen one doesn't mean everything goes his way. In fact, he gets this contention, this hatred from the others, resisting him at every turn, and he submits to it. He digs, he gives it to them. He digs another one, they quarrel, he gives it to them. And then he finally finds one that is truly his, Rehoboth, and you can see he's becoming the man that Abraham was, of faith, of trusting the Lord's provision for him. No matter what the world, no matter the enmity and the hatred and the jealousy of the world, Isaac knows he is blessed. The Lord will take care of him, and he provides for him. And by the way, Rehoboth is a special town because that's where my sister lives, in Rehoboth, Massachusetts.
Oh, that's neat. You didn't
So,
know this one.
yes. So every Thanksgiving I go to Rehoboth.
And
Actually,
you get enlarged, right?
I get enlarged. That's correct.
It's better than going up.
Yes. All right. Let's take the next paragraph here, 23 to 25. Let's start there. Haley, you want to read that for us?
Sure. Hold on. From there he went up to Beersheba, and the Lord appeared to him the same night and said, I am the God of Abraham your father. Fear not, for I am with you, and will bless you and multiply your offspring for my servant Abraham's sake. So he built an altar there and called upon the name of the Lord and pitched his tent there, and there Isaac's servants dug a well.
Another well being dug. All right. So he now goes up to Beersheba. And we've been to Beersheba before. I think we got a picture of that down here, maybe. There it is. All right, so he leaves. This is now kind of leaving the Philistine area. Beersheba wasn't that where there's Rehoboth? And he heads up to Beersheba. So he's kind of making his way out of Philistia and coming back to where Abraham was dwelling in this area, in the land of Canaan. So he comes to Beersheba. And what happens in Beersheba?
He
Okay.
pitches his tent and digs a well.
Well, before that,
God comes to him.
yeah, the Lord appears to him.
Mhm.
And he says what?
I
The
am the God.
Lord, the God of your father Abraham.
Yes.
Fear not.
The God of Abraham. And fear not. Why not?
He is with us.
I am with you. Right. I will bless you and multiply your offspring for my servant Abraham's sake. Again, so much for Abraham's sake, that covenant. For I'm with you. This is one of the things we saw with Abraham. The Lord appears to him multiple times. He gives him that first calling, and then he tests him. He sends him out, and then the Lord appears to him after the tests and reaffirms what he said to him. Remember, the Lord appears to him, says, go sacrifice Isaac, and when he does follow through on that, and the Lord stops him from killing his own son, he then says, I will surely bless you. And he reaffirms that great covenant with him. So with every test, now we're seeing the same way that God had dealt with Abraham, he's dealing with Isaac. And through a series of tests, and that's what we see. These are all tests. Will you trust the Lord? One of the things that you can see in the story of the wells is that Isaac does not fight with them. He does not, he could do it. I mean, he's wealthy, he's blessed, he probably has more men and more of and remember Abraham had like hundreds of men who were military trained in his encampment. He probably could have fought and maybe taken possession of these things, but he just moves and trusts the Lord. This is the Lord's moving him out of the land, moving him to where he wants him to be. And so he just kind of follows that lead and trusts the Lord, and the Lord blesses him and says, don't be afraid, I'm with you. And he builds an altar and digs another well. And digs a well.
This, obviously, I have a note on the names of the wells, and there's a well called Bathsheba.
Yeah.
And Bathsheba means the well of the oath or covenant.
Yes, we
Well,
had a story
what?
about that before.
The well of the what, Liz? Oh,
I have a note in my Bible. I have a study Bible, so it's got
Yeah.
a list of all the wells and what the names mean. And
Okay.
Bathsheba means covenant or the oath of, no, the well of the oath.
And that's where Isaac gets the new that reaffirms the covenant from the Lord. The Lord
Yeah.
do it again.
We saw Beersheba. Hagar wandered in the wilderness, Beersheba.
Yep. And that
Uh,
well was called Beer Lahai Roy. And that one means well of him that liveth and seeth me.
Yeah. And then Abraham and Abimelech had a battle over a well. If you remember, that was the 7, he gives the 7 lambs and the as a sign that this is Abraham's well, proofs of that well. So there's a history with that well, Beersheba. That's great. All right, let's pick it up. How are we doing on time right now? Oh, we should break here. I guess it's about time to go. Any comments or questions before we conclude?